Tobias Reed was preparing dinner when his 9-year-old son Phoenix approached him, voice barely above a whisper. "Daddy, Mommy has a lover and they're going to take all your money." Those words struck Tobias like lightning, making him feel as though the world around him was crumbling. For 3 years, he had completely trusted his wife Scarlett and given her full control over the family's finances. But now he realized that everything he believed in might just be an elaborate deception. The battle to protect his family and regain control of his life was about to begin. Before we get into it, hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to like if you're ready for the drama to unfold, and comment where you're watching from: Phoenix, Denver, or San Diego. Now let's get back to the story of Tobias and how one whispered secret from his son would change everything he thought he knew about his marriage. The kitchen felt unusually quiet that evening as Tobias Reed stood at the granite countertop, methodically chopping vegetables for dinner. At 42, he had built a successful career as a software engineer, working remotely from their comfortable Atlanta home while maintaining a steady income that afforded his family a middle-class lifestyle. The familiar sounds of his children playing upstairs, 9-year-old Phoenix's animated voice mixing with 6-year-old Luna's giggles, provided the soundtrack to what should have been another peaceful weekday evening. Yet something felt different tonight, though he couldn't quite place what it was. Scarlett had left earlier that afternoon, claiming she needed to meet a friend for coffee downtown. At 37, his wife remained as beautiful as the day they met, with her shoulder-length auburn hair and bright green eyes that had first captured his attention at a tech conference years ago. She had always been the more social one in their relationship, maintaining friendships that Tobias sometimes envied for their apparent effortlessness. But lately, these coffee dates seemed to happen more frequently, and she often returned home later than expected with vague explanations about traffic or extended conversations. The financial arrangement in their household had evolved naturally over the years. Tobias focused on his work, often pulling long hours on complex projects that required deep concentration, while Scarlett managed the day-to-day expenses, school fees, and household budgets. She had always been good with numbers, having worked in accounting before Luna was born, and Tobias appreciated not having to worry about bills and bank statements. It allowed him to concentrate on what he did best: writing code and solving technical problems that paid well enough to support their comfortable lifestyle. However, small inconsistencies had begun to creep into their routine. Last week, he had noticed a credit card statement on Scarlett's desk showing charges at expensive restaurants he didn't remember visiting. When he mentioned it casually, she explained it away as client entertainment for her part-time consulting work. The explanation made sense at the time, but something about her defensive tone lingered in his mind. Then there were the phone calls that stopped abruptly when he entered the room, and the way she had started keeping her phone face down whenever they were together. Tonight, while waiting for Scarlett to return from her latest outing, Tobias found himself paying closer attention to details that had previously escaped his notice. The mail had included bank statements for accounts he didn't recognize, statements that Scarlett usually collected before he saw them. When he tried accessing their joint online banking account to check their balance, he discovered the password had been changed without his knowledge. A cold sensation settled in his stomach as he realized how little he actually knew about their current financial situation. The sound of Scarlett's car pulling into the driveway interrupted his increasingly troubled thoughts. Through the kitchen window, he watched her sit in the driver's seat for several minutes, apparently finishing a phone conversation before finally coming inside. Her smile seemed forced as she greeted him with a quick kiss on the cheek, and her explanation about heavy traffic felt rehearsed. As she headed upstairs to change clothes, Tobias noticed she took her purse with her, something she normally left by the front door. Standing alone in the kitchen, surrounded by the ordinary implements of family life, Tobias felt the first real stirring of doubt about the woman he had married and trusted completely. The vegetables lay forgotten on the cutting board as he stared out the window, watching the last light of day fade into darkness. Something was definitely not right in his carefully ordered world, though he had no idea how dramatically his life was about to change. The weekend arrived with an unusual tension hanging over the Reed household. Tobias found himself watching Scarlett's movements more carefully, noting how she checked her phone constantly and seemed distracted during family conversations. Saturday morning brought the kind of domestic routine that had once felt comforting but now seemed charged with unspoken secrets. While Scarlett claimed she needed to run errands alone, Leaving the children with him, Tobias decided to use the opportunity to spend quality time with Phoenix and Luna, hoping their innocent chatter might distract him from his growing concerns. Phoenix had always been perceptive for his age, inheriting his father's analytical mind along with his mother's social awareness. As they worked together, building an elaborate Lego spaceship in the living room, the boys' usual enthusiastic commentary about rocket engines and space exploration gradually gave way to a more subdued mood. Luna, absorbed in coloring at the coffee table nearby, hummed quietly to herself, occasionally looking up to admire their construction progress. The peaceful scene should have been exactly what Tobias needed, yet he couldn't shake the feeling that Phoenix had something weighing on his young mind. "Daddy," Phoenix said suddenly, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper as he glanced toward the stairs to make sure his mother wasn't nearby. "Can I tell you something important? But you have to promise not to tell Mommy I said anything." The serious tone was so unlike his usually carefree son that Tobias immediately set down the Lego pieces and gave Phoenix his full attention. The boy's dark eyes, so similar to his own, held an adult-like worry that made Tobias's stomach tighten with apprehension. Something about the careful way Phoenix looked around before speaking suggested this wasn't typical childhood drama. "Of course, buddy," Tobias replied gently, keeping his voice steady despite the alarm bells ringing in his head. "What's on your mind?" Phoenix fidgeted with a red Lego block, clearly struggling with whether to share whatever secret he'd been carrying. The boy had always been honest to a fault, sometimes painfully so, which made his current hesitation all the more concerning. Tobias waited patiently, sensing that pushing too hard would cause Phoenix to retreat into the protective silence that children often used when adults made them uncomfortable. "Last week, when you were in your office working on that big project, Mommy took me and Luna to the park," Phoenix began slowly, his words carefully chosen. "But we didn't go to our regular park. We went to that fancy one downtown, near all the tall buildings. Mommy said she had to meet someone there, just for a few minutes." The boy paused, seeming to weigh each word before continuing. "There was this man waiting by the playground. He was wearing a really nice suit, like the kind you wear to important meetings. Mommy told us to play while she talked to him." Tobias felt his heart rate quicken, but forced himself to remain calm, understanding that any strong reaction might stop Phoenix from sharing the rest of whatever he had witnessed. "Did you hear what they were talking about?" he asked casually, as if discussing something as mundane as the weather. Phoenix nodded, his expression growing more troubled as he recalled the memory. Even Luna seemed to sense the shift in atmosphere, looking up from her coloring book with curious eyes, before returning to her drawing of what appeared to be a rainbow-colored castle. "I couldn't hear everything because they were trying to be quiet," Phoenix continued, "but I heard the man say something about money and bank accounts. And then Mommy laughed in that special way she does when she's trying to make someone feel better about something bad." Tobias knew exactly what laugh his son meant. Scarlett's practiced social laugh that she used in professional situations or when managing delicate conversations. The man gave her some papers and she put them in her purse really quickly. Then he said something about our plan and how everything would work out soon. The implications of what Phoenix was describing hit Tobias like a physical blow, but he managed to keep his expression neutral while his mind raced through possible explanations. "Did Mommy say anything about who this man was?" he asked, though he dreaded the answer. Phoenix shook his head, then seemed to remember something else that made his young face scrunch up with confusion and worry. The boy glanced once more toward the stairs, as if afraid his mother might materialize and overhear their conversation. "But Daddy, there's something else," Phoenix whispered, leaning closer to his father. "When we got back in the car, I heard Mommy talking on the phone. She thought I was sleeping because I had my eyes closed, but I was just resting. She was talking to the same man from the park, and she said something about getting everything ready and making sure Tobias doesn't suspect anything. She used your real name, not Daddy, like she usually does when she talks about you to other people." The final piece of Phoenix's revelation felt like ice water in Tobias's veins. The calculated nature of what his son was describing, the secret meetings, the discussion of money and bank accounts, the explicit mention of keeping him unaware, painted a picture that made all of his recent suspicions crystallize into a terrifying certainty. His wife, the woman he had trusted with every aspect of their financial life, was clearly involved in something that required his ignorance to succeed. The betrayal felt almost too large to comprehend, yet the innocence in Phoenix's voice made it impossible to dismiss as imagination or misunderstanding. The following Monday morning began with a carefully orchestrated performance. Tobias maintained his usual routine: coffee at 6:30, quick review of overnight emails, gentle wake-up calls for the children, while his mind worked furiously to process the devastating information Phoenix had shared. Scarlett moved through her morning activities with her typical efficiency, preparing lunches and organizing backpacks, seemingly oblivious to the fact that her carefully constructed deception was beginning to unravel. The normalcy of their domestic dance felt surreal given what Tobias now suspected about their marriage and finances. After Scarlett left to drop the children at school, claiming she had errands to run afterward, Tobias immediately began his own investigation. Using his technical skills, he accessed their home computer's browsing history, discovering that Scarlett had been researching divorce attorneys and asset protection strategies. The searches had been conducted during his work hours when she knew he'd be occupied with client calls and programming deadlines. Her digital footprints revealed a pattern of careful planning that extended back several months, including visits to websites about establishing separate bank accounts and protecting assets during marital dissolution. The discovery of a hidden email account under a name he didn't recognize provided the most damning evidence yet. Though the account was password protected, Tobias's cybersecurity background and allowed him to access it through recovery options linked to Scarlett's phone number. What he found inside made his hands shake as he scrolled through months of correspondence with someone named Donovan Hayes. The emails detailed elaborate plans for transferring funds from their joint accounts into offshore holdings, timing strategies for filing divorce papers, and discussions about maximizing Scarlett's settlement while minimizing his access to marital assets. One particular email thread revealed the full scope of their conspiracy. Donovan Hayes wasn't just Scarlett's lover. He was a financial consultant with a questionable background who specialized in helping wealthy spouses hide assets during divorce proceedings. His messages to Scarlett were filled with technical advice about creating paper trails that would support claims of separate property, while simultaneously moving their actual joint assets beyond Tobias's reach. The cold, calculating nature of their correspondence showed that this wasn't a crime of passion, but a carefully planned financial operation. Tobias printed the most incriminating emails and bank statements, his hands trembling slightly as evidence of his wife's betrayal accumulated in neat piles on his desk. The scope of the deception was staggering. Scarlett had already moved over $50,000 from their savings account into investments controlled by Hayes, using forged signatures and electronic transfers that bypassed normal security protocols. She had also taken out a home equity loan against their house, using funds to purchase assets that only she controlled, all while maintaining the pretense of managing their normal household expenses. Realizing he needed professional help to navigate this legal and financial minefield, Tobias researched divorce attorneys specializing in cases involving hidden assets and financial fraud. Gabrielle Cross's name appeared repeatedly in online reviews from clients who had faced similar situations, spouses who discovered elaborate schemes to defraud them of marital property. Her law firm's website emphasized discretion and aggressive representation for victims of financial betrayal, exactly what Tobias's situation seemed to require. The phone call to schedule a consultation felt like crossing a bridge from which there would be no return. Gabrielle Cross's receptionist could fit him in that afternoon, and her professional manner suggested this was far from the first case involving spousal financial deception they had handled. Tobias found himself speaking in careful, measured terms about his concerns regarding asset protection, using euphemisms that masked the emotional devastation behind his need for legal counsel. During their meeting in her downtown Atlanta office, Gabrielle Cross proved to be exactly the kind of attorney Tobias needed: sharp, experienced, and utterly unsentimental about the realities of marital betrayal. A woman in her late 40s with steel gray hair and penetrating brown eyes, she listened to his story without expressing shock or judgment, taking detailed notes and asking pointed questions about documentation and timelines. Her office walls displayed law school diplomas and professional certifications that suggested she was well equipped to handle complex financial cases. "Your wife has been extremely thorough," Gabrielle said, after reviewing the evidence Tobias had gathered. This level of planning suggests professional guidance, which means you're not dealing with amateur mistakes that might give us easy legal openings. However, her very thoroughness has created a paper trail that we can follow. The key is going to be moving quickly before they realize you've discovered their scheme. She outlined a strategy that involved freezing joint accounts, securing documentation of all marital assets, and filing protective motions that would prevent further unauthorized transfers. The attorney's matter-of-fact approach to what felt like the complete destruction of his family life was both comforting and disturbing. To Gabrielle Cross, this was simply another case of financial infidelity with familiar patterns and legal remedies. But for Tobias, every document she reviewed and every strategy she proposed represented another piece of his carefully built life falling apart. The woman he had loved and trusted had apparently been planning his financial ruin for months, while sharing his bed and raising his children. As the afternoon consultation concluded, Tobias found himself agreeing to an aggressive legal strategy that would begin immediately. Gabrielle would file the necessary paperwork to protect his interests while he returned home to continue the charade of normalcy. The most crucial element would be preventing Scarlett and Hayes from realizing their plan had been discovered until legal protections were firmly in place. This meant maintaining his routine while secretly preparing for a battle he had never wanted to fight. 3 weeks of careful preparation had passed before Tobias felt ready to confront his wife. During this time, he had perfected the art of appearing normal while systematically documenting every aspect of Scarlett's deception. Gabrielle Cross had secured protective court orders that would freeze their assets the moment he filed for divorce, and private investigators had gathered additional evidence of Scarlett's relationship with Donovan Hayes. The weight of maintaining this double life, loving father and husband by day, betrayed spouse building a legal case by night, had taken its toll, but Tobias knew that timing would be crucial to protecting his children's future. Thursday evening arrived with the kind of ordinary domestic atmosphere that had once brought Tobias comfort, but now felt like an elaborate stage production. Phoenix and Luna had finished their homework and were settled upstairs with their tablets, giving him the privacy he needed for what would undoubtedly be the most difficult conversation of his marriage. Scarlett was in the kitchen, cleaning up after dinner while humming softly to herself, completely unaware that her carefully constructed deception was about to collapse around her. The irony of her apparent contentment while planning his financial destruction was not lost on him. "Scarlett," Tobias said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his system, "we need to talk about something important. Could you join me in the living room?" His wife looked up from loading the dishwasher, her expression shifting from mild curiosity to subtle wariness as she registered the serious tone in his voice. For just a moment, her practiced smile faltered, and he caught a glimpse of something that might have been fear or calculation behind her green eyes. But she quickly recovered her composure, drying her hands on a kitchen towel while nodding with apparent concern. The living room, with its comfortable furniture and family photographs, seemed like an inappropriate setting for the destruction of their marriage. Yet Tobias had chosen it deliberately. This was where they had celebrated birthdays and Christmas mornings, where they had discussed dreams for their children's futures and made plans that he now realized were nothing but illusions on his part. Scarlett settled into her usual spot on the sofa, tucking one leg beneath her in the casual pose that had once seemed endearing, but now appeared calculated to project innocence and vulnerability. "I've discovered some things that concern me deeply," Tobias began, placing a manila folder on the coffee table between them. "Things about our finances, about decisions you've made without discussing them with me, and about relationships you've been maintaining in secret." Scarlett's face went completely still, the practiced expression she normally wore falling away to reveal something much more guarded and alert. Her hands, which had been resting casually in her lap, now gripped the fabric of her jeans as if anchoring herself against whatever storm was coming. "I don't understand what you're talking about," she said, but her voice lacked conviction, and her eyes kept drifting to the folder that contained evidence of her deception. "If you're worried about our finances, we can review everything together. I've been handling things exactly as we agreed." The response sounded rehearsed, as if she had prepared for this possibility, though perhaps not expected it to happen quite so soon. Tobias recognized the tone she used in professional situations when she needed to control difficult conversations while appearing reasonable and cooperative. Tobias opened the folder and began laying out printed emails, bank statements, and photographs taken by the private investigator. Donovan Hayes, he said simply, watching as his wife's face went pale at the mention of the name. $53,000 transferred from our savings account. A home equity loan I never signed for. Plans to file for divorce while hiding marital assets in offshore accounts. Each piece of evidence he placed on the table seemed to shrink Scarlett further into herself, though her expression remained defiant rather than apologetic. "You've been investigating me?" Scarlett's voice rose with genuine anger now, as if his discovery of her deception was somehow a greater violation than the deception itself. "Going through my personal communications and hiring people to follow me? How dare you violate my privacy like that?" The audacity of her response, turning his justified suspicion into an attack on her rights, revealed a level of manipulation that Tobias was only beginning to understand. She was attempting to make herself the victim even as evidence of her elaborate betrayal lay spread across their coffee table. "Phoenix told me about the meeting in the park," Tobias said quietly, and watched his wife's angry facade crumble completely. "Our 9-year-old son has been carrying the burden of your secrets because he knew something was wrong, but didn't understand what he had witnessed. He heard you planning to make sure I didn't suspect anything." The mention of their son seemed to hit Scarlett like a physical blow, and for the first time since the conversation began, she appeared genuinely shaken rather than strategically defensive. For several long moments, the room was silent except for the sound of children's voices upstairs and the distant hum of traffic outside. Scarlett stared at the evidence spread before her, her hands now trembling slightly as the full scope of her exposed deception became clear. When she finally looked up at Tobias, her expression had transformed from defiance to something that might have been resignation, though he suspected it was simply another calculated pose designed to elicit sympathy or forgiveness. "It's not what you think," she said finally, though her voice lacked any real conviction. "Donovan and we were trying to protect the family's assets from your business risks. You work in tech, and everyone knows how unstable that industry can be. We were just being cautious, creating backup plans in case your income disappeared." The explanation was so obviously false that Tobias almost felt insulted by her assumption that he would believe it. Yet he recognized it as likely something she and Hayes had prepared for exactly this situation. "The emails I read don't support that story," Tobias replied calmly. "They talk about maximizing your settlement, minimizing my access to assets, and timing everything for maximum financial impact during divorce proceedings. This isn't financial planning, Scarlett. This is fraud." His wife's shoulders sagged as she realized that her usual manipulative tactics weren't going to work in the face of such comprehensive evidence. The woman who had seemed so confident in her deception now appeared small and defeated, though Tobias reminded himself that even this vulnerability might be another performance. The divorce proceedings moved with surprising speed once Gabrielle Cross filed the necessary paperwork. Within 48 hours of Tobias's confrontation with Scarlett, court orders had frozen all joint accounts and prevented any further unauthorized asset transfers. Scarlett's initial shock had quickly transformed into desperate attempts at damage control, but her hasty phone calls to Donovan Hayes only provided additional evidence of their conspiracy. The private investigators' recordings of these conversations would prove invaluable in court, as they captured both parties discussing strategies to hide evidence and coordinate their stories. Donovan Hayes proved to be exactly the kind of man Tobias had expected: smooth, arrogant, and completely unprepared for serious legal consequences. When authorities began investigating his business practices in response to Gabrielle's complaint, they discovered a pattern of similar schemes involving other wealthy clients. The financial consultant, who had seemed so sophisticated and untouchable, suddenly found himself facing federal charges for wire fraud and money laundering. His urgent need to distance himself from Scarlett's case left her without the professional guidance she had relied upon to execute their plan. The children's adjustment to their new reality required delicate handling, though Phoenix seemed almost relieved that the family's unspoken tensions had finally been addressed. Tobias explained the situation in age-appropriate terms, emphasizing that sometimes adults make poor choices that affect the whole family. But that didn't change how much both parents loved them. Luna, being younger, accepted the changes with the resilience typical of 6-year-olds, though she occasionally asked when mommy would be coming home. These questions were perhaps the most difficult part of the entire ordeal for Tobias. Scarlett's attempts to fight the divorce terms proved futile once the full extent of her financial deception became clear to the court. Her attorney, clearly uncomfortable with defending such obvious fraud, advised her to accept a settlement that would allow her to avoid criminal charges in exchange for returning the stolen assets. The home equity loan she had secretly obtained was reversed, and the offshore accounts were frozen pending full investigation. Her dreams of financial independence through betrayal had become a nightmare of legal liability and public humiliation. The custody hearing proceeded more smoothly than Tobias had dared hope. Phoenix's testimony about the secret meetings, delivered in the judge's chambers rather than open court, provided compelling evidence of Scarlett's willingness to involve their children in deceptive activities. Child psychologists noted that both children seemed more comfortable and secure when staying with their father, and Scarlett's own attorney reluctantly acknowledged that her recent behavior called her judgment into question. The court awarded Tobias primary custody with supervised visitation rights for Scarlett. Within 6 weeks of that devastating Thursday evening confrontation, Tobias found himself legally separated and in control of assets he had never realized were at risk. The house, their savings, and his retirement accounts remained intact, while Scarlett faced the prospect of starting over with limited resources and a damaged reputation. Her part-time consulting work had dried up once word of the legal proceedings spread through Atlanta's business community, leaving her dependent on temporary employment in the small settlement the court had allowed her to keep. The satisfaction Tobias felt wasn't the sweet revenge he might have expected, but rather a profound relief at having protected his children's future and his own financial security. Gabrielle Cross's aggressive legal strategy had not only preserved their assets, but had also established a clear record of Scarlett's deception that would influence any future legal proceedings. The woman who had planned to leave him financially devastated was now facing exactly that fate herself, though Tobias took no joy in her downfall. Donovan Hayes' criminal trial provided a final chapter to the conspiracy that had nearly destroyed Tobias's family. Federal prosecutors used his case to send a message about financial fraud targeting vulnerable spouses, and his conviction carried a sentence of 5 years in federal prison. The asset recovery process returned most of the money he had helped steal from various clients, though the emotional damage to families like Tobias's couldn't be so easily repaired. Scarlett, who had cooperated with prosecutors in exchange for immunity, testified against her former lover with the same calculation she had once applied to planning Tobias's ruin. The speed with which their elaborate scheme had collapsed once exposed demonstrated how fundamentally unstable it had been from the beginning. Built on deception and requiring constant lies to maintain, the conspiracy had been doomed to failure once Tobias began asking the right questions. Phoenix's innocent observation had been the thread that, when pulled, unraveled months of careful planning and revealed the hollow foundation beneath what Tobias had believed was a solid marriage. As autumn settled over Atlanta, Tobias reflected on how completely his life had changed in just a few months. The man who had trusted so completely that he never questioned financial statements or password changes had become someone who verified everything and trusted carefully. His relationship with his children had grown stronger through the crisis, as they learned they could depend on him to protect them, even when their world seemed to be falling apart. The naive husband, who had handed over financial control without question, had become a man who understood that trust, once broken so completely, could never be fully restored. Standing in his home office one evening, looking at bank statements that now told the truth about his family's financial situation, Tobias felt something he hadn't experienced in months: genuine peace. The battle to reclaim his life had been won through intelligence and preparation rather than emotion or revenge. Scarlett's betrayal had nearly succeeded, but his willingness to face the truth and act decisively had turned her weapon against herself. The children were safe, their future was secure, and he had learned that he was stronger and more capable than he had ever imagined. Spring arrived early in Atlanta that year, bringing with it a sense of renewal that felt particularly meaningful to Tobias as he watched his children adapt to their transformed family structure. 6 months had passed since the divorce was finalized, and the Reed household had settled into new rhythms that somehow felt more authentic than their previous routine. Phoenix had grown more confident and talkative since the family secrets had been exposed, no longer carrying the burden of information too complex for a 9-year-old to process. Luna had adjusted with the remarkable resilience children often display, accepting their new normal with an ease that sometimes amazed her father. The morning routine now belonged entirely to Tobias, and he had discovered unexpected satisfaction in the domestic details he had previously left to Scarlett. Preparing breakfast while reviewing the children's schedules, helping Luna choose clothes that matched her increasingly definite opinions about fashion, and listening to Phoenix's detailed explanations of his latest science projects filled the house with a different kind of energy. Miss Henderson, the housekeeper he had hired to help manage the household, proved to be exactly the kind of reliable, grandmotherly presence the family needed during their transition. Tobias had restructured his work schedule to accommodate his new responsibilities as a single parent, declining projects that required extensive travel and focusing on clients who respected his need for family time. The financial security he had fought so hard to protect and allowed him this flexibility, and he found that working fewer hours while being more present for his children created a better balance than he had achieved during his marriage. His reputation in the tech industry remained strong, and several colleagues had actually increased their business with him after learning how professionally he had handled his personal crisis. The children's relationship with their mother had stabilized into a pattern of supervised visits that seemed to work for everyone involved. Scarlett appeared to have gained some perspective on her actions during the months since the divorce, though whether this represented genuine remorse or simply acceptance of consequences remained unclear to Tobias. She had found steady employment with a small accounting firm that was willing to overlook her recent legal troubles, and she maintained a modest apartment across town, one where Phoenix and Luna spent alternate weekends under court-mandated supervision. These visits were neither traumatic nor particularly joyful for the children, who seemed to view them as simply another part of their routine rather than emotional reunions or painful separations. Phoenix had told his father that Mommy seemed different now, quieter and more careful about what she said, but that she still helped with homework and remembered to pack his favorite snacks. Luna enjoyed showing off her latest artwork and school achievements, treating the visits as opportunities to share news rather than seeking comfort or approval. The children's emotional independence from their mother's dramatic ups and downs impressed Tobias and suggested they were developing healthy boundaries. His own healing had progressed more slowly than his children's adaptation, but Tobias recognized that this was natural given the depth of betrayal he had experienced. Trust, he had learned, was not something that could be quickly rebuilt or easily transferred to new relationships. Well-meaning friends had suggested introducing him to available women they knew, but he felt no urgency to pursue romantic connections while his primary focus remained creating stability for Phoenix and Luna. The thought of eventually finding love again didn't frighten him, but it also didn't seem necessary for his happiness. Professional counseling had helped him process the anger and self-doubt that had accompanied the discovery of Scarlett's deception. Dr. Williams, a therapist who specialized in recovery from intimate partner betrayal, had guided him through the complex emotions of grieving a relationship that had been partially illusory. Learning that many intelligent, successful people experience similar betrayals had reduced his sense of personal failure, while developing better strategies for recognizing manipulation had restored his confidence in his judgment about people and situations. The house itself had been transformed from a place that held painful memories into a genuine family home. Tobias had redecorated the master bedroom completely, removing all traces of Scarlett's presence and creating a space that reflected his own preferences rather than compromises he had made during marriage. The children had been allowed to redesign their rooms as well, and their enthusiasm for choosing new colors and furniture had turned what could have been a sad process into an adventure in self-expression. On quiet evenings after homework was finished and the children were settled with books or quiet games, Tobias often found himself in his home office, not working, but simply appreciating the peace that came with knowing exactly where he stood financially and legally. The bank statements he reviewed each month told clear, honest stories about income and expenses. The legal documents on his desk protected rather than threatened his family's security. The phone calls he received were from clients and friends rather than attorneys delivering updates about legal battles. Sometimes he thought about the man he had been before Phoenix whispered those devastating words in the living room. Trusting to the point of naivety, focused on work while assuming his domestic life was as stable as it appeared, believing that love and good intentions were sufficient protection against betrayal and manipulation. That man seemed almost like a stranger now, though Tobias didn't regret having been capable of such complete trust, even if it had made him vulnerable to exploitation. The future stretched ahead with possibilities that felt genuinely his to choose, rather than illusions created by someone else's secret agenda. Phoenix would start middle school in the fall, bringing new challenges and opportunities for growth. Luna was thriving in first grade and had announced her intention to become either a veterinarian or an astronaut, possibly both. Tobias himself was considering opportunities to expand his consulting business, perhaps even hiring associates who could help him take on larger projects while maintaining his commitment to family time. As he turned off the lights and headed upstairs to check on his sleeping children one final time, Tobias felt the deep satisfaction that came with knowing he had successfully protected what mattered most. The crisis that had threatened to destroy his family had instead revealed his own strength and resourcefulness. Phoenix and Luna were safe, their futures secure, and their father had proven capable of fighting for them when it truly mattered. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges and opportunities, but tonight in the quiet house they had reclaimed together, everything was exactly as it should be.